Yesterday we sat here for 8 hours and talked. So we've talked about this stuff before, but it's good to have you all here. This is open source mining, firmware, pools, and the decentralization imperative. That is a lot of words, but they're all important words. Open source is the fundamental requirement, I think, of decentralization, especially when we're talking about the technical layer of what builds up Bitcoin. Um, and so, I wanted to get into this, the decentralization imperative, and why that's so important to what we do, right? It secures things. We know that Bitcoin mining is this ideal flexible load, right? The miners can sort of come and go, and the buyer will just be there. The buyer is the network. And so what makes it that way, right? One of the things is decentralization, right? There's no one dictating who uses this and how it gets used. So yeah, let's dig into this. We've got a fantastic crew of miner developers. These are the guys that make these machines that that consume all the energy and support this industry. So why don't you guys introduce yourself? We'll start down there with Michael, and we go this way.
Hey, my name is Michael, or people know me under the name Schnitzel. I'm one of the 256 Foundation engineers. I built the Libre board. It's back there on the table if you want to see it. It's an open source control board that basically allows you to integrate your miners in all kind of different environments. So for house heating, industrial heating, it makes it a lot easier to physically connect the miners to your existing systems, because the regular miners that you buy, the control boards on there, they're very dumb. And we want to connect them to pumps, to temperature sensors and all that stuff. And that's what I'm building.
My name is Ryan Kester, and I'm the lead developer on the 256 Foundation's firmware called Mugina. I'm an electrical engineer and embedded Linux software developer for many years, and thrilled to be working on the same type of technologies in Bitcoin.
I'm John Stephanopoulos. I'm the lead engineer and founder of FutureBit. Our mission for the last 10 years is to decentralize hardware on the consumer side. So we build desktop miners for anybody to participate in Bitcoin mining. Whether you're a small guy that has an apartment in the city that can't run a 3,000 watt miner, or anybody that just wants to start mining, we have plug and play devices to do that.
Massive.
And you are?
Oh, my name is Scott. I work on the BitAxe, work with the 256 Foundation, very involved in open source Bitcoin mining, advocacy, development. Yeah, thanks. John, you've been talking about this lately, but I wanted to get into maybe you could talk to us about what is the status quo for the manufacture of Bitcoin mining hardware? Like what is the majority of the market doing? Where do they do it?
Yeah, so currently most of the manufacturing is done out in China, and more importantly, the ASICs that run all the miners that you guys run are pretty much produced by three main producers in China. Probably, we were talking about this last night, 90% of the hash rate is from these three manufacturers, and I think it's over 50% is from Bitmain alone. So the hardware is very centralized. We don't know, by the nature of ASICs, they're very closed source. We don't know what is going on in the chip beyond what the manufacturer tells us. So that's where I've been focused in the last 5 to 10 years, is to find more capital and companies that want to build ASICs for the long term of Bitcoin and decentralization that are outside of China. So we've had some great partners in the past 5 years that we've made inroads. And there's a few new companies coming up that are doing that as well. And I think that's going to be important in the next 5 to 10 years, is having more options on the core ASIC hardware side.
So you're doing this. You're putting this into practice, right? I think you said, and I think I tend to agree, is that you're the only one manufacturing miners like at scale right now in the U.S. Like, tell us how that stack works. What are the components there?
Yeah, so we're the main producer that builds at scale a full Bitcoin miner in the USA, and that means taking an ASIC, and we've partnered with R9 that makes an USA engineered ASIC into our USA built board. So our factory's out 20 minutes north of here in Texas. I just came from there. So we build the board, the manufacturing of the board, where the components go on top of it, as well as an assembly in the USA, which is a pretty big deal. And it took us, a long time to bring our supply chain here and do it at a cost that makes sense for the consumer market.
That's huge. That is, having looked into it myself, it's just a ton of work. It's really hard to overstate just how much the manufacturer of this hardware has just left this country and all other countries, and basically all moved to China. So it's a big lift to do this, but it's cool to see it happening.
Yeah, and I mean we're seeing the change happen in terms of manufacturing in the U.S., especially what's going on with tariffs. That's helped a lot. Obviously, when your base components are up 50% tariffed from China, you're forced to look at other things. So there's, I think that's going to be the next hardware revolution. There's going to be a big shift in manufacturing done here, and it's starting to happen now. So we're excited about it.
Okay, this is a key component, right? This is the decentralization of where this hardware is manufactured, the design of it, the building it, actually putting it together. That adds another notch in de-risking this for the entire industry of building this up. Shift gears a little bit to software. We were talking before, Schnitzel, about you've been involved in open source software, the enterprise software industry for
25 years, yeah.
25 years, decades, long time. And I was just hoping you could talk about, what we were talking about before, where, you've seen open source like take over in this world, like just swallow the whole enterprise software world.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at from a proprietary world, open source is seen as a cancer. Whatever it touches, it will slowly eat it up and it will take it over. And for me, the biggest example is Microsoft. Right? If you look back, server management systems used to be Windows only. Like every enterprise had Windows, and there were always these punks that used Linux. And today, like 25 years later, you have Microsoft making the most revenue with their Azure cloud. It runs 70 to 80% Linux. They are the biggest contributors in terms of hours and money into the Linux Foundation. Because what happened in the meantime is Linux completely won the race around server management. Because, right, as if you own a server as a company and you depend on that thing to solve your problems in business, you will hit the ceiling at one point that the server is not doing what you exactly want. With a proprietary software, you cannot change it. With Linux, I can go in, I can hire a Linux engineer, and they can do exactly what they want. And that's why today, everything runs Linux. Like even all your cars, they run Linux now. Like your phones run Linux, your fridge, if you have a smart fridge, it runs Linux. Why? Because these companies wanted to customize their system to the way that they wanted it. They did not want to have somebody at Microsoft that they need to call and hope, can you please add this feature to it? Right? They wanted to change it. And in the software world, it's gone, right? Like there's still proprietary software out there, but I can tell you these are very few companies that spend a lot of money to keep their proprietary edge, but everything else, open source completely won. And we see this with every single device, and we see it with AI, right? And when I started doing this, open source was like 10 years behind proprietary. Today, we look at OpenAI or Anthropic releasing a new model, and it literally takes 3 months, and there's an open source model that is as good. Right, that's the gap now. We're not talking years, we're talking months, sometimes even weeks. Plus, in some cases, it's actually open source that brings the innovation that goes faster. And this is obviously all in the software world, but what is really, really interesting, this also happens in the hardware world, specifically around data centers. So in around 2009, 2010, Facebook realized that they have all these data centers all over the world, And for every place that they went, they got another type of hardware, right? The hardware rack, the connectors, the plumbing, all this was different. So they created a standard. It's called the Open Hardware Foundation or the Open Hardware Project. And they created a standard and they said, if you want to be a vendor to us, you need to build it by that standard. And so everybody in the world that wanted to deliver hardware to Facebook, they just took that standard that was open source, they built it to the spec, and suddenly you could sell to Facebook. And all these other companies realized, oh, wow, this is really cool. So today there's an open standard in the data center world. OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Facebook, Meta now, everybody builds by that standard. And you can go to the website and you find more than 2,000 specs that down to the connector, in which angle that the connector, that a data center, that your rack needs to be connected to a rack on the other is documented and specified. And it's happening, right? That's completely standard that we have this. And so we look at this in the hardware world and we see this in Bitcoin mining. And I come from that world and I'm looking at this and it honestly feels like kindergarten, like what we're doing here. Like this is like so far behind, but somehow there's 3 companies. And I think that's the reason there's 3 companies in the world that probably talk to each other that tell each other, let's not standardize because that's how they make all the money. Right? They make more when they change the form factor by half an inch wider. They make more money. So they actually don't have an incentivation to standardizing. So they completely own us. They completely control all of you with just randomly making the fans a bit longer or wider or coming up with a new connector. I mean, what the hell is going on, right? Like we have standardized connectors. Let's just use the same. But of course, they're going to make more money because you have to buy more connectors. Right. And so I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be the force against this and try to help us, but also all of you to not be under the pressure of these 2-3 companies that basically, they control everything. And that's why we're so excited about these things. That's where we're building it. Yes, we don't have a 3,000 watt miner yet. Like we're not there yet, but at least of the miners that we have built, they're completely open source. You can take them, you can build them, you can look at them, you can build on top of them. And we're seeing slowly how more and more companies are interested. So, and that's the cancer that I'm describing. Right? It's a good cancer. It's the thing that as soon as one of them starts, it's going over. What hasn't happened yet, unfortunately, with these big miners is we haven't had yet one that really commits. And that's what you usually see in the software and the hardware world that already got eaten by that good cancer. The first one that goes will have a lot of success and everybody's going to run behind. So we're still trying to find the first hardware manufacturers, ASIC manufacturers that is willing to work with us. But we're getting closer. The time is running out for anybody to commit because there's going to be the first one. And I can tell you they're going to have more efficient chips. They're going to have more efficient setups. They're going to reduce their cost of their mining infrastructure because if something doesn't work, you can just change it, right? You want your specialized hardware or like APIs to control these miners based on specific load curves or whatever, or you want to specific fleet management that you can't do today. And that's the really cool thing is you can just ask your agent now to build it. Like you don't even need to hire a software engineer anymore. But try to go to your agent and ask to change a proprietary software. It will tell you it can't. But if you go to your agent and you point it to an open source software and say like, hey, can you connect me this firmware to this load demand API? And it will take 20 minutes and done. So that's the other thing where now with AI, open source is going to win even faster. Like this is, and we see it already. Maybe we can talk a bit about this, but it's not like this is not unstoppable now, but it's only going to work with open source.
We've been having at 256, we've been having a lot of fun and making a lot of progress developing these things. But I wanted to touch on something you mentioned briefly with Facebook and Google, right? Obviously, they spend a bunch of money to come up with these specs for the data centers, right? You know, paying architects, engineers, systems builders to like come up with this, and then what they just gave it all away. Like, what was the benefit to them to put this out there?
Well, in the end, as a company, and specifically if you are like in the management position, it's all about risk reduction. Like your job is how do I reduce risk? How do I get up tomorrow and still have a company? And for every vendor that you choose, it's a risk. For every vendor that delivers you software or hardware or goods or whatever, what happens if that vendor suddenly goes away? And that's the reason, right? If you have a customized connector or plug or software that only one company in the world can provide you, what do you do if this company is suddenly going away? And the fact that I open source it and make it an open standard, suddenly there is 5 or 10 vendors of the same. So you can switch, but also what is really great, they will start to compete against each other from price. So you will actually pay less. So with you open sourcing and putting these specs out there, you're saving money in the long run. Yes, you're spending time in creating the documents because like if you look at some of these documents, I encourage all of you, go to the websites. There's like 500-page documents from Google that describes with diagrams and drawings on everything how this has to be done. And yes, this costs a lot of money, but they know in the long run they're going to save money because if a vendor suddenly jumps out, I can easily switch to the other one. Plus, I can actually play against them and the price is going to go down. So in the long run, it's a money-saving exercise.
I think that's a really important point. A lot of times this open source stuff is seen as like, whoa, we're just giving away our intellectual property, right? This is, why would we give away something we work so hard on? And I think that that's a little bit short-sighted, right? You can use this to make more money in a lot of different ways. Ryan, I want to talk about the firmware that you've been working on, but I wanted to get in a little bit, just a little like lesson for folks who might not be aware. Like, what is firmware? What does it even do, and why should we care about it?
Well, I'd start by saying that firmware is just software. Just 2 words for essentially the same thing, especially for the purposes of this discussion. And everybody knows what software is. So no mystery there. What everyone may not appreciate is software is the invisible yet most important component inside of a Bitcoin miner. It's really true of any electronics these days. The hardware, the piece you buy, the thing you can touch, is really you've bought a capability. You've bought a machine that can do something. It's like buying a car, but it doesn't have a driver. The software is the driver of the car. It's the component inside the box that really defines what the behavior is, how it works. It really defines the product. As a software person, it's easy for me to say, but the hardware sort of exists to run the software. So the software is really the defining component of any modern electronics product these days. And because it is the piece that defines the behavior, that's one of the most important pieces when it comes to decentralization. We're worried about the hardware being manufactured in China, being black boxes we don't really have the designs for. That same whole line of reasoning and argument goes for the software too, especially the software. We can't afford for an entire industry to be defined by some black box pieces of software that nobody has the ability to inspect or to modify or to suit their needs. So Mujina firmware exists to be the Linux kernel of Bitcoin mining, in that it is going to be an open project that runs on all sorts of hardware, not only our own 256 Foundation hardware, but we're currently in the process of porting it to all the off-the-shelf mining equipment. And it will no longer be a black box at that point. The most important invisible component in the miner, we're trying to make a little more visible and modifiable.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, right? The firmware is what controls the show, right? I mean, the miners do all the work, but the firmware tells them what to do, right? Is that fair?
Yeah, without software, the ASIC chips are just highly organized, expensive sand.
Very expensive sand. Yeah. So this is, I think, an important point of the decentralization imperative, right, is to have good access to the firmware, right? Because that's what controls the show. And we're talking about all levels of the stack, right? Or all sizes of miners, from the smallest to the largest. And you know, the decentralization imperative is important for freedom, right? Which is a cornerstone of Bitcoin. But I think that there are, and maybe you can talk about this, some ways that you can just make more money when you have more freedom to control the firmware.
Yeah. I mean, because it is sort of the defining component of a miner and defines the behavior, um, anything that you want this device to do differently or do for you is defined by this software. So the ability to change it, or the ability to have a community of developers, engineers of your own that can tailor this to your operation is key. I was just talking to someone earlier this morning, said that every time they curtail their operation because they don't have some fine-grained ability to control their miners via its firmware, via its software, they curtail basically by shutting off power to the machines. And that happens very quickly. So the machines go very quickly from their full temperature, full operation to nothing, and they damage about 3% of their machines every single time they curtail. 3% of their machines, the power supplies fail, the boards have some issues. On industrial miners from China, 3% fail every time they curtail. So they're talking to me like, man, we got to fix this. So we were talking about, okay, well, what would you want to do differently? Well, what you really want is firmware that when you curtail, whatever your time limit is for curtailing, maybe I gently ramp down the power consumption and therefore temperature over the period of a couple of minutes, keep the fans running, get the thing cooled down, and then shut it off instead of just essentially pulling the power cord on your entire operation, which damages boards. So that's a huge expense, that having 3% of your machines fail every time you need to curtail. So that's sort of a complicated way, but even simpler ways. There are some still proprietary, not modifiable third-party firmwares, but they charge anywhere up to like 2% fee. So there's 2% of your margin right there. So the ability to run this open software, to essentially own your own firmware, means you get to save that 2%. So that's even just a simple way right at the top to make more money with open firmware.
Yeah, that's the fun part, right? Like, I think most miners already realize that the stock firmware is not very optimized, so they buy a third-party firmware to get 10% more efficiency, but then they have to give 2% of the 10% away again. And I'm like, what is, like, we can just, like, these third-party firmware, they're not doing rocket science, and even if they would, we could figure that one as well out. So, like, we can just give you 10% efficiency without the dev fee. Like, imagine that. And, like, so that's, like, the thing, that it's just, like, of all the third-party firmwares out there, like, we talk to them, we encourage them, like, you better open source now because we're coming for all of you. And we have also now the power of the AIs, right? Like, we literally had examples where we point the AIs to the third-party firmware, it reverse engineers how it does something, and it puts it into Mujina, and now we have the same capabilities that they had as well. And it took me half an hour, and it cost me $10 of tokens. And so, like, that's what's just going to happen. Like, and then we're maybe even figure out 11 or 12%, right? And we're not saying that's the other thing. Like, if you figure out a way how to do even more optimizations, you can just keep that for yourself, or you can contribute it back. Like, that's the other thing. A lot of these licenses don't force you to give it back, or there is some specific ways where you have to give something back. Like, it's also not that just because you run open source software inside your data center that now everybody will have access to all your things. That's another thing that, like, in the last 25 years, luckily in the software world, people learned is that open source doesn't mean automatically insecure, because that's what a lot of people thought. Luckily, lawyers today understand what open source means, most of them at least.
Yeah, and the weird thing is, I don't know how much people know about this, and I'll date myself a little bit here, but actually, let's do a poll. Who knows what CG miner is here. Yeah, and that should not be the outcome of this group of people, right? So
why? What's the significance of CG miner?
When Bitcoin first started, all firmware was open source. So Conclavis, which is a legend in the Bitcoin mining space, created this open source mining software that all hardware manufacturers used in between like 2011 and about 2015, 16. I was actually one of the maintainers on a fork by Luke called BFG Miner. So every manufacturer, every ASIC manufacturer had this open source repository that they would just add their driver to. So any hardware would just be able to use the software. And that was the industry standard. And then for some reason around 2015, these Chinese manufacturers started taking this open source software and they essentially disregarded the license and started just maintaining their own versions of it. Bitmain is the worst perpetrator of this. And eventually everybody just started building their own closed source versions of that, which is weird because that's not how it started. And it's good to see that you guys are kind of bringing that back. And that there's going to be an active development of open source firmware that, new manufacturers will be able to add to their drivers to, hopefully. So.
Yes, Bitmain is the worst. You're absolutely right. Obviously, they dominate the market by some large, unknowable share of the market. But we're all working on products that serve basically niches that they have ignored. Can you talk about like the process of making home miner hardware and talk about efforts to open up parts of it? And I'm also curious, doing this not as a charity, how do you justify opening that up?
Yeah, I mean, our mission at the end of the day has always been, especially on the hardware side, why we build the miner is not just to mine. Our mission is always to get more nodes out on the network. So a big portion of our mission is to get more Bitcoin nodes and Bitcoin node operators out on the network that are mining directly onto their node. And that's kind of something that I'm sure a lot of you guys don't understand is anybody can point your hash that you have to your own node very easily. And as long as you have the certain amount of hash rate where the variance isn't too high, you can produce your own blocks. Anybody here that's operating a 10 exahash farm should be mining on their own node. There's no reason to be going to Foundry or a third-party pool. On the decentralized aspect, that means a lot to me because that's more important. I think that's the most important decentralization factor that's affecting Bitcoin mining right now is the concentration of block producers, the people producing the blocks using pools from your hash rate. And that hash rate should be way more distributed than it currently is. Right now, I think between Foundry and Bitmain and their proxies, it's over 50% are have control of the hash rate, which means they have control of the blocks they produce, which means they have control of the transactions going into those blocks. And I think that's the most imminent threat that needs to be solved by what we're doing. And that's kind of why our product includes a node in the miner so anybody can solo mine a block to their own node and spin up a solo pool that they can point any hash rate to. Obviously, the first block that was found on a FutureBit device, which was really cool. But that you can do cool use cases like that, and anybody can do it, and they can spin up the product in 5 minutes. And anybody that runs a big mine here can literally spin up any product that can mine your own blocks, and everybody should be doing that.
And we have, like, during the telehash, so yesterday we had up to 3 exahash pointed to a completely open source pool. So the software is now there. Like for the longest time, yes, it was actually quite hard to run this pool yourself because it was open source, but not very well documented. But now, yeah, so any of the big miners, yes, if you have more than 10 exahash, it literally costs you a couple of $100 per month to run a server that is your pool. And then you can, again, because the other next thing is these pools take a fee again, right? Like, so do the calculations. I don't know, calculate how much you pay your pool provider per year. And if it's more than $100,000 to $200,000 a year, you're losing money, because that's probably what it's going to cost to hire an engineer that builds the pool internally with open source software. And so you can just run yourself. And we saw it yesterday during the telehash. We saw Foundry finding 7 blocks in a row. Like, that used to be in the Bitcoin, like years ago, this would have been an uproar, because people, the people behind Bitcoin, like the whole idea was that this never ever happens, that somebody could do more than 6 blocks, right? Because we always said, wait 6 blocks confirmation, because the likelihood that somebody will find 6 blocks in a row is impossible. And look at 2026, it happens multiple times a week. But that's bad. That's really, really bad. And we see everything that happens with the Strait of Hormuz and all that stuff, right? Like, that's exactly how we're gonna cause issues. Because if one provider can, for multiple blocks, exclude specific transactions, whatever, the Bitcoin network, the whole idea of Bitcoin network, that it's money for enemies, is gonna go away. And we're gonna fall back to USDT and all these other things that can be controlled, and they are controlled. And so, yeah, if we really want freedom money, we need to have a decentralized pool. That's the only way. And I think we're just sitting all here and accepting this, that one entity finds 7 blocks in a row and nobody freaks out. I think that's very bad.
I guess I have a question for any of you. So we talked a lot about pools now, and how miners, service providers, people providing services to this whole industry can, help set up, build products, build software to enable more miners to run their own nodes. Is there any other aspects of the ecosystem that that operators can do to both make themselves more money and support the network?
I think it's donating to the people that tried to fix it, right? There is, unfortunately, we've been talking about this, there is no Red Hat yet of open source firmware mining. So there is not a company that is ISO certified and has all the licenses that you can go to and walk to and saying, I will give you this amount of money and you give me an open source firmware. That doesn't exist. It will exist at one point. But if you even have 1% belief that anything we said is how it should be, I encourage you to donate to the 256 Foundation. Because we're working every single day. All of us could have probably a lot better paying jobs in some enterprises, but we believe in this and we're trying to do it. And on our website, you can see how much money we raised as the foundation. It's peanuts compared to what we should have, or like what you all make every single day. So I encourage you, like, to help us, that we can help you in the end. And at one point, yes, there will be companies that you can just have service contracts and whatever, and hopefully these companies will then donate some of their revenues back. But like right now, there is no such thing. But I think, yeah, it's going to happen, and help us help you. That's basically what we're trying to do.
My only suggestion is just be more involved in the network. I understand most operators here, just, it's a business, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, you guys are securing the Bitcoin network, whether you want to believe it or not. You are. So you should be understanding what that means, and you should, if you don't know what a pool is, or if you don't know what a node is, at the very least, just make yourself aware of what it is. Make yourself aware of what your hash rate is doing for the Bitcoin network, and then come up with your own conclusions on what that means for your operations. But at the very least, just go inside the base layer and understand what's going on there.
Yeah, get curious about the invisible yet important component inside your Bitcoin miners.
That sounds like a decentralization imperative to me.